Going Home Again Returns to the Parental Home of Young Adults by Julie Devanso and Frances Coben Goldenschneider. So basically in this article they go straight into talking about how there has been a large increase in numbers of young adults who are remaining in the parental home, and how there's also been a very large amount of young adults who are leaving and then returning to the parental home. And returning to co-reside in the parental home, and that despite these large numbers and large increase in the people living and returning to live with the parents, that there is still very little evidence on or in literature and studies done on this subject. He says that the studies that have been done are anecdotal, and that they they've all been using scientific reports, and that this has limited that research. So he's basically saying that the research available is it lacks a lot and has a lot of gaps, and it's very limited, but that the ones that are out there then have a lot of limitations within it. So basically that's basically what he's saying in the literature review, and he says that in his paper he's going to analyze the determinants of returning home of young adults and ask two questions, and he's basically going to be asking two major questions in his study. The first question are what factors influence young adults' decisions to return home, and the second question is what implications do these results have for understanding temporal trends in the living arrangements of young adults. The last thing he really says about within the literature review is that in all of his research, marriage is often very overlooked as a factor in the explanations for patterns of living arrangements of young adults. And he says that maybe it's because it has become so common for unmarried young adults to establish in the independent households, but that he believes that it should still be part of the research, and he himself, and then this article they're including normal role transitions, particularly marriage, and they're going to be analyzing that as one of their major study of what they're going to be looking for. So now onto the methods. In this study, they used the data from the National Longitudinal Study of High School Class of 1972. This study was a large-scale longitudinal study of over 22,000 adolescents in the United States as they moved into early adulthood. The young adults were surveyed in spring 1972 and in the autumn of 1973, 1974, 1976, and 1979. Excuse me. So having these reoccurrent interviews and surveys allowed them to be able to trace the behavior over a period of 7.5 years, during which the typical member and during which the child that they were interviewed at the beginning had started from age 17 and a half to age 25, and they were able to kind of follow them in their journey of becoming an adult, and when obviously in relation to the co-residency, but they were able to follow and see how everything progressed, and that's really important to this study. Because the sample consisted of high school seniors, it did exclude those who had not completed their high school degree. And furthermore, this data did not provide a complete history of the living arrangements, but only snapshots of the living arrangements of the time of the interviews. This reduced the measured amount of the back and forth movement. Those absent only briefly and those who returned only briefly would be missed. And And there was also in this sample of the study, there was also attrition over the period, particularly the fourth follow-up. That's just something that they found in their methods. In the sample consisted of those who did not live with their parents in any given year, in a given survey year, particularly the first one. And the dependent variable is a dichotomous indicator of whether the young adult was living with his or her parents during that time. So basically, to be part of the sample, you had to have had not been living with your parent at some point, and in one of the points of the interview, of the 7.5 years that they interviewed you, and then again be living after not living again. So basically, you had to have left and then come back, and this had to be done in the period of the following year. So if you left in let's say the second year that they were doing interviews, by the third year of interviews you had to have already been back. And that is basically how they figured out their samples. So now on to the results and their major findings. So one of the major findings of this study was that returners home were not only related to early failures in the marital and work roles of adults, but it also occurred after the transitional roles of like student and military services, which often necessitated living away from parents. So once these things were completed, they tended to come back. So it's not always that. So basically, what they found was that it's not always that kids are coming back because they can't deal with the real world, or they because of the marriage, because they got divorced or whatever, but also because they went to school and then they graduated, so now they need a place to live, because the reason they left in the first place was because they were going to school, which would necessitate them to leave the home, or like for military, for example. So that's basically one of the major findings of this study. They also found that They also found that residential arrangement that changes in the residential arrangements were consequences of the costs and benefits associated with the parental home and community. And they found that parental resources played a very important role, as well as indicated by the finding that young adults are more likely to return to families that financially supported them when they were living when they weren't living with them, so during their absence. But they are less likely to return home the greater their own income. So basically, living when they were living on their own, if they were more still depending on the parents, that usually led them to end up returning home at some point. But if they were more independent and had their own income and all of that while they were absent from the parental home, that usually was like they stayed where they were and they didn't come back to the house. They also found that a shortage of resources or a need to conserve resources was a major factor leading to the return to co-residence of parents and young adults, children who once lived away from the home. So factors associated with, for example, the lack or loss of income, the loss of housing, or the need for greater resources were associated with an increase of probability of returning home. And these included like being divorced, losing a job, or leaving school to non-employment, leaving military service, and becoming a married parent and returning to school. To continue with the results, they also found that living away from the home before marriage may not be normatively supported for certain subgroups, such as like Hispanics, for example, and that since members of each of these subgroups were more likely to return to live with their parents because of these like ideas that they had that it was okay or not okay for them to be leaving or staying in the home. Um, they also found that one of the biggest findings in this study that I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, was that those kids who like left the home unexpectedly, like not like that the parents weren't aware that they were gonna leave, they just left unexpectedly, and it was like kind of like a shock to the parents, those are more likely to return. um They also found that the factors that reduce the probability of returning home among the unmarried who lived away from home were the same as those associated with the increased probability of leaving home to premarital residential independence in the first place. So basically, like older age, being a female, remaining a student, higher like having your own income, like a high income of your own, and being an unmarried parent, and a shorter duration of residence in the parent's community, all were factors that reduce the probability of returning home among the unmarried subgroup. They also found that predictable the sorry the more predictable the initial move away from the home was, the less likely the person was to return. So basically, if the more the parents knew about the leaving, the less likely they were to come back. Um, They also found that the unmarried subgroup who lived away from home were much more likely to return to live with the parents than the married group. And they also found that the parental home, so basically the whole conclusion of their findings was that the parental home was not only like a safety net for the young adults, like it wasn't only like when the young adults ran into an unexpected twist on the road to their independence, or if like they needed, if like something happened and they couldn't live on their own anymore, or like it was getting too hard, like it wasn't only like a safety net for them to come back, but it was also like a home base, like something to return to while encountering many of the frequent changes that occur in life. So basically, it's not always that the return home was not always something that um was not always something for like of like reasons like that could be considered like bad, like because they couldn't deal with adulthood, but it could also just be like for normal like changes in life that they just happened to just go back home because it was their home base. And that's basically the like major conclusions of the findings of this study and article.